So here we are at the SEDEX 2018 conference, and our theme is Beyond Compliance. If the SEDEX conference and talking about beyond compliance is not in your travel plans, now is a good time to head for the exits. I was asked to be up to the daunting task of participating on a panel that is going to be defining beyond compliance. And I was quite trepidatious to accept, to be honest with you, because I'm not entirely sure I have a good answer. But I figured it's not the first panel of the day. I'm not even the first speaker on the panel. There are all these great speakers ahead of me. They'll say smart things. I'll learn something, and I'll be able to, sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'm a lawyer, after all. So having been sat there all morning and listening to Martine and Jonathan and Sally and Tom and Steve and Genevieve, nice to have a little rhyme in there in the land of Shakespeare here. After listening to all these great speakers, I got to tell you, I still don't know what beyond compliance is about. Fortunately, however, the panel has been asked to define in terms of what it means to you. So there's a nice little pass built in for all of us to say, we can't trust you to tell us what it means for everybody. You're not that smart, but just tell us what it means for you. So here's what it means for me, or at least here's my hopefully not too rambling attempt to, on my feet, figure out what it means for me. You see, those of us who've been doing this for a good long time have learned a thing or two, mostly what doesn't work, and from there try to extrapolate to get us into what does work. And some of us, like my good friend Jonathan, are finding our patience running a little low, which I fear for you, Jonathan. This space needs a lot of patience, but hopefully the progress that you are seeing and you are yourself driving at SEDEX will be enough to feed your soul and not let your impatience overwhelm you. But here's the thing. When I get asked, or when I hear people talk about beyond compliance, and sort of, this isn't work, we gotta talk about the next thing, I worry because it sounds to me like there's an underlying assumption, one of two assumptions, that either we've done compliance, we got that covered, which I heard sort of in Steve's presentation. Now we got to go to the next thing. So we've solved the problem. Now let's evolve to the next thing. Or it doesn't work, which is what I heard in Genevieve's presentation. So we've got to go beyond it because this thing's broken. It is not worth carrying on. And I would submit that both of those are simultaneously true and not true. In other words, I don't think that we should be talking about beyond compliance because we've got it licked. Compliance is now part and parcel of our lives. We've got that sorted out. On to the next best thing. I don't think so, because quite frankly, being in this business, I can tell you it isn't done. There is still an awful lot of work to be done just at that basic compliance level. And quite frankly, I don't think one is profitably able to move on to the next step without first mastering the basic step. You simply cannot run without first learning to walk. Yet on the other hand, I also do not hold with those who believe that compliance is broken, and irredeemably so. In other words, we must go beyond compliance because compliance just isn't cutting it. It's not getting us anywhere. We've got to abandon this this whole ideology that we've built up over the last couple of decades and figure out from scratch a better way of doing things. I don't hold with that either because quite irrefutably, we have seen the benefits that compliance has brought to this space. Jonathan mentioned a bunch of statistics, and the one that I am particularly proud of for the compliance space is the reduction in the child labor numbers over the past decade. And there's been immense strides forward made in worker safety and health, and even in the environmental area where we continue to have a lot of challenges in front of us. Things are unquestionably better today than they were 10 years ago. So what then is my take on what the conversation ought to be about. For me, and again to shamelessly steal from Jonathan's presentation, the Colin Powell quote, different context as he pointed out, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I tend to actually hold with in most contexts. But what is important about that quote is the subtext. If it is broken, you absolutely have to fix it. So a part of the discussion has to be, how do we address the issues that compliance is not handling well? But another part of the conversation also has to, and I suppose it's the same conversation really from a different angle, has to start by saying, what are we getting right? How can we build on that? So, to me, the real conversation isn't so much beyond compliance and the implication therein that one way or the other you're leaving compliance behind and moving ahead somehow, but rather it is one of rethink compliance. It is definitely a mind shift, and it does involve all kinds of systemic change, which does indeed, as Sally told us, begin from within. But truly, to me, getting it right means learning from where we've been, seeing what we've done right and what we've done wrong. And when we move ahead, it's not beyond compliance. It is simply an evolution of compliance, rethinking it, recognizing it for its role, right? And I think, again, I heard from Genevieve's presentation that audits and certifications have a role to play. And to me, they will always continue to have a role to play. I think the problem, and perhaps where the folks that are in the camp that hold that compliance has failed and is irredeemably unhelpful, I think the problem with the reason why they conclude that is because they ascribe to compliance, to audits and certifications, expectations that are unfair to place on that particular activity. It has a role to play, but audits, certification itself is never going to solve the problem on its own. So beyond compliance, the rethinking of compliance means understanding the role it has to play. And for me, I've always I picked up this Chinese proverb a few years ago. Those of you who have heard me speak have heard me say this lots of times, but I always use it because it is so evocative. You do not fatten a pig by weighing it. You do not fatten a pig by weighing it. The act of weighing the pig doesn't actually make it any fatter. You got to feed the pig to make it fat. But you absolutely have to weigh the pig as well to know how fat it's gotten. Right? How will you know when it is at optimal fatness? Can I butcher the English language here in London? Is that okay? If you don't weigh it. Similarly, now, and let me finish that thought. But weighing it isn't what's making it fat. You have to feed it to make it fat. So similarly, that to me is the right thinking when it comes to what's the evolutionary space we ought to be in when we regard compliance. You are going to always need audits and certification. You're going to always need that diagnostic tool, the weighing tool, right? Because how do you get there if you don't know where here is? How do you go beyond if you don't know where you're starting from? So you're always going to need that diagnostic tool. You're always going to need audits and certifications, but do not expect that to solve your problems. That is merely the base on which solutions have to be built. And that, to me, is the right way to think about beyond compliance. It is a rethinking. It is not an abandoning. It is not a, we're done, time to move on to the next thing. Neither of those are appropriate in my mind. I realize I'm contradicting two academicians, and I have to sit next to them now. But to me, the right way of thinking it is take what you have, build on it, recognize it for what it does give you, and do not blind yourself to the things that it does not. Then you can think of compliance in a new light, which, as I said, I would cast more as rethink compliance and not simply beyond compliance as the implication one way or the other of abandoning it either because it's done what it's supposed to or it has completely failed. With that, I will thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to the questions.